January 2023. Prince Harry publishes his memoir, Spare. It became one of the fastest-selling non-fiction books in British publishing history. Millions of copies, millions of readers, hundreds of thousands of column inches dissecting every word, every revelation, every carefully placed admission. And buried inside its pages, stated plainly, without apparent concern for the consequences, is something that, under United States immigration law, should have triggered an immediate, mandatory review of Harry's right to live in America. In Spare, Harry admits to using cocaine. He admits to using cannabis. He admits to using psychedelic mushrooms. These are not allegations. They are not tabloid fabrications. They are not the claims of a disgruntled former employee or an anonymous palace source. These are the Duke of Sussex's own words, published in a book he wrote, under his own name, distributed in every bookshop and on every digital platform across the globe. Under US federal immigration law, specifically the Immigration and Nationality Act, an applicant who has admitted to or been found to have committed violations related to controlled substances can be deemed inadmissible. Full stop. That is not a grey area. That is not open to creative interpretation. That is the law as written, as applied, and as enforced against thousands of ordinary people every single year. Harry lives in the United States on a visa. That visa was issued by the Department of Homeland Security, and the Heritage Foundation, a prominent Washington, D.C. conservative think tank, filed a Freedom of Information Act request demanding to see Harry's immigration file. The Department of Homeland Security refused to release it. They went to court. The DHS refused again. And the question that has been burning through legal circles, political circles, and royal watching circles ever since is one that nobody in Washington or Montecito wants to answer out loud. Did Prince Harry receive preferential treatment from the United States government? And is someone, somewhere in the machinery of power, making absolutely certain that file never sees daylight? If you are new here, welcome. This channel exists to do one thing: to tell you what the official channels will not, to follow the paper trail where the press releases stop, to ask the questions that the palace briefings are specifically designed to prevent you from asking. If that is the kind of forensic, unflinching royal commentary you are looking for, then hit like, subscribe right now, and turn on notifications, because what I am about to walk you through is one of the most legally complex, politically charged, and personally devastating stories in the entire Harry and Meghan saga. And we are only just getting started. To understand why this story is so explosive, you need to hold two things in your mind simultaneously. You need to understand how seriously the United States immigration system treats drug admissions. And you need to understand how seriously the United States government treats its relationship with the British royal family. Because those two things are, in this particular case, in direct and irreconcilable conflict. US immigration law is not subtle on the question of controlled substances. The standard applied to visa applications is not whether you were convicted of a drug offense in a court of law. It is not whether charges were brought or whether a jury deliberated. The standard is whether you have admitted to using, possessing, or trafficking controlled substances. An admission in writing, on record, publicly verifiable, is legally sufficient to trigger inadmissibility proceedings. You do not need a criminal record. You do not need a conviction. You need an admission. That is the threshold. Harry did not hint at drug use. He did not allow it to emerge through a leak or through an unauthorized biography written by someone with a grudge and an axe to grind. He wrote it himself, in detail, in a memoir published in January 2023 and available in every bookshop in America, on Amazon, on Audible, in airports, in supermarkets, in every corner of the English-speaking world. Cocaine, cannabis, psychedelic mushrooms. 3 separate substances, 3 separate admissions, all in the public record before the ink on the page had dried. Now, the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank with a long-standing and serious interest in both immigration enforcement and government transparency, filed its Freedom of Information Act request in early 2023, shortly after Spare was published. The request was, in its essence, remarkably straightforward. Release the documents related to Harry's visa application. Release any records of waivers or exemptions that may have been granted. Show us the paperwork. Show us how the decision was made. Show us whether the law was applied consistently. The Department of Homeland Security declined. Their stated reason that releasing the file would constitute an unacceptable violation of Harry's personal privacy is the standard government response to immigration-related FOIA requests. It is not, on its surface, an unusual response. Immigration files routinely attract privacy protections. That is not remarkable in isolation. What made it remarkable was the context. Because the Heritage Foundation argued, and the argument carries genuine, substantial legal weight, that when an individual has publicly and voluntarily admitted to the very conduct that triggers immigration law concerns, the privacy rationale for withholding the file is fundamentally and materially weakened. Harry told the world he used these substances. Harry put it in a best-selling book. Harry's privacy in that particular regard ceased to exist the moment his publisher sent the manuscript to the press. So what, precisely, is the Department of Homeland Security protecting? That is the question a federal judge was eventually asked to consider, and the answer, or rather, the continued, sustained, deliberate absence of one, is the real story. Throughout 2024, the legal battle over Harry's immigration file continued to move through the US federal court system. The Heritage Foundation's legal team argued that the public interest in government transparency, specifically the question of whether the DHS had applied immigration law consistently, or whether a British prince with a Netflix deal and a Montecito mansion had received exceptional treatment that would never be available to an ordinary applicant, outweighed the standard privacy protections the government was invoking. This is not a trivial argument. It is not the complaint of partisan activists looking for something to hit Harry with. It goes to the absolute heart of a principle the United States of America likes to present as foundational, as sacred, as definitional to the entire American project: equal treatment under the law. Thousands of ordinary visa applicants, people without titles, without Netflix deals, without powerful connections and celebrity friends, and the implicit weight of a foreign royal family behind their name, have been denied entry to the United States, or have had existing visas revoked, based on drug use admissions that were far less prominent, far less detailed, and far less publicly documented than Harry's. There are documented, verifiable cases of individuals being denied US visas for admitting to cannabis use in countries where cannabis is entirely legal. There are cases of visa revocations triggered by a single social media post. There are cases of people turned away at the border for admissions made in private conversations that somehow found their way into official records. The US immigration system, when it chooses to apply its drug-related inadmissibility provisions, applies them with considerable, sometimes brutal, force. The system does not tend to extend the benefit of the doubt. It does not tend to look for reasons to wave people through. It tends, in the experience of countless ordinary applicants, to err on the side of refusal. The Heritage Foundation's case rested on a question that is simple to state and apparently impossible for anyone in authority to answer. Why not Harry? The court proceedings did not produce the file. The Department of Homeland Security maintained its position. The federal judiciary, applying the standard established legal framework for immigration privacy, did not compel disclosure. The file stayed sealed. The process produced no smoking gun, no leaked document, no devastating revelation about what the visa application actually contained, or what decisions were made behind closed doors. But here is what the process did produce, and this is the part that matters most: the public arguments, the legal filings, the political commentary generated by the case. All of it, taken together, produced something almost as significant as the file itself would have been. It produced the impression, vivid and durable and very difficult to dislodge, that something is being hidden, that someone decided the rules that apply to everyone else do not apply to the Duke of Sussex, that the system that turns away ordinary people every single day found a quiet, unremarked, officially deniable way to look the other way. And in the courts of public opinion, which is ultimately the court that matters most for a man whose entire post-royal identity is constructed on a carefully managed public narrative impression, is everything. Perception is the game. And right now, the perception is not good. Then came January 2025, and everything shifted. The Trump administration took office, and with it came a new and extraordinarily volatile dimension to the visa question. Senior figures within the new administration, including members of Congress aligned with the Trump political orbit, people who had been vocally, enthusiastically supportive of the Heritage Foundation's legal efforts, began making public statements suggesting that Harry's visa situation should be formally and urgently reviewed. That the drug admissions documented in Spare warranted serious, official immigration scrutiny. That no individual, regardless of title, regardless of royal blood, regardless of which famous family they happen to be born into, should be exempt from the laws that apply to every other person who wishes to live on American soil. The White House did not formally initiate deportation proceedings. Let me be clear about that. There was no official move, no legal action, no formal immigration enforcement action taken against Harry. But the public, deliberately amplified, politically motivated, and strategically timed, hung over Montecito with the weight of something that could not simply be wished away. Senior American politicians were, in public forums, on record, raising the question of whether a British prince should be removed from the United States. That is not a small thing. That is not background noise. That is a direct, deliberate signal about power and who holds it. And Harry, who had built his entire American life on the assumption of permanence, on the belief that California was a safe harbor, a place beyond the reach of the institutions that had made his life inside the royal family so unbearable, suddenly found himself in a position he had not fully prepared for. Geographically exposed in a way he had never anticipated, vulnerable in a way that no amount of Netflix money or Archwell branding or carefully crafted interviews could protect against. Because if the United States revoked his visa or declined to renew it, Harry could not simply return to the United Kingdom. Not without the security arrangements he had fought for in the British courts and lost. Not without the royal infrastructure he had voluntarily and publicly walked away from. Not without confronting, physically and in full public view, everything he had crossed an ocean to escape. He would be, in the most literal and practical sense, homeless. Not in the way that word is usually used, not without shelter or resources or money, but homeless in the deeper sense, without a country that he could inhabit on his own terms, without a geography that reflected the identity he had spent the last 5 years constructing. Now here is where the visa story stops being a legal curiosity, stops being a partisan political football, and starts being something far more consequential. A geopolitical chess piece, a lever of power. A story about what institutions do to people who try to leave them. Because the question of what ultimately happens to Harry's US visa is not decided solely by immigration lawyers and federal judges working through established legal frameworks. It is decided ultimately in the way that truly consequential political decisions have always been decided, by relationships, by phone calls, by the kind of quiet diplomatic exchange that never produces a press release and never appears in the official record, by the things that are said in rooms that do not have cameras. The relationship that matters most here is the relationship between the British government and the United States government. The UK-US special relationship is one of the most important bilateral partnerships on the planet. Intelligence sharing at the deepest level. Military cooperation across multiple theatres, trade relationships worth hundreds of billions of pounds. The deep, structural, historically rooted interdependence of two English-speaking democracies with shared histories, shared institutions, shared values, and intertwined strategic interests. That relationship in early 2025, with a new US administration in place and a new set of political priorities reshaping Washington, was being managed by Downing Street with extraordinary care. Every point of friction was being assessed. Every potential irritant was being catalogued and evaluated. Prince Harry is, from the perspective of the British government, an unambiguous irritant. He has sued British institutions. He has made public accusations of criminal behaviour against the British press. He has, in the view of significant and influential portions of the British establishment, caused serious and lasting damage to the monarchy at a moment when the monarchy was already navigating the profound challenges of the King's illness and the transition of operational weight to the Prince of Wales. But he is also, constitutionally, inescapably, by the simple fact of his birth, a member of the British royal family, a British citizen, a man whose treatment by a foreign government reflects, in some meaningful sense, on Britain's international standing and on the dignity of the Crown. The British government cannot publicly advocate for Harry. The political cost domestically would be staggering. The optics of Number 10 lobbying Washington on behalf of the Duke of Sussex, while simultaneously managing the King's health and carefully positioning William's expanding role, would be politically catastrophic. The headlines write themselves. The public backlash would be swift and severe. But the British government also cannot afford to allow Harry to be publicly, humiliatingly, visibly deported. The spectacle of a British prince being removed from American soil, filmed on phones, streamed globally, consumed by hundreds of millions of people who follow this story with the intensity of a soap opera they cannot turn off, would be a reputational wound the monarchy might not recover from quickly. It would be an image that would define Harry's story, and by extension, the royal family's story, for a generation. So both governments find themselves in the same deeply uncomfortable position. Publicly, saying nothing. Privately, managing everything. Hoping that the legal process exhausts itself without a definitive, irrevocable outcome. Hoping that the question simply loses oxygen, stops generating headlines, fades from the public agenda without anyone being forced to make a decision that leaves marks. And Harry is caught between a British establishment that will not publicly defend him and an American administration that is actively using him as a political signal, as a demonstration of a certain kind of populist toughness, has, in the assessment of people who follow his movements and public appearances closely, become noticeably, markedly quieter. The combative, lawsuit-filing, tell-all-giving, institution-challenging Sussex of 2022 and 2023, the Harry who seemed to relish the fight, who leaned into the confrontation, who appeared to believe that going public was always the right strategic choice. That version of Harry has been replaced, in 2025, by a man who is choosing his battles with considerably more care. Who is measuring his words? Who is calculating the cost of each move in a way that the earlier, angrier version of himself did not always bother to do? Because he now understands, with absolute and unambiguous clarity, that his ability to choose any battles at all depends entirely on remaining on American soil. And that is no longer something he can take for granted. That bedrock assumption that California was permanent, that Montecito was the final answer, that the Atlantic Ocean was protected enough, has been removed. And what replaces certainty, in a man who has already lost so much, is a very specific kind of caution. The caution of someone who has finally understood the nature of the trap they are in. Now let us think about what Harry's visa situation means in the long game, because this is not simply a legal story. It is not simply a political story. It is a story about power, about geography, and about the limits of a narrative built on escape. Harry's entire post-royal identity is constructed on a foundation of physical distance from the institution he left. Montecito is not just a home, it is a statement. The house in California, 5,000 miles from Buckingham Palace, 5,000 miles from the press pack outside Kensington Palace, 5,000 miles from the protocol and the hierarchy and the endless, suffocating weight of royal life. That house is the proof of concept. It is the physical evidence that it is possible to walk away from the crown and build something new. Something yours. Something free. That foundation requires him to remain in America. Not metaphorically, literally, practically, legally. If he loses his visa, if the political pressure around the drug admission and the sealed immigration file forces him into a posture of public compliance with an administration and a political culture he finds deeply, personally repugnant, the narrative collapses. The story falls apart. Because the story Harry has been telling for 5 years about freedom, about choosing your own life, about refusing to be defined by an institution that never fully saw you, that story requires him to actually be free. Genuinely, legally, practically, unconditionally free. A man his right to remain in the country where he has built his life is contingent on the political mood of the White House, on the decisions of politicians who have publicly used him as a rhetorical prop, on the contents of a sealed file that might or might not contain evidence of a decision that bent the rules. That man is not free. He is tolerated. He is permitted. He is there because of someone else's suffering. And tolerated, for Harry, is a status he knows with painful intimacy from his years inside the royal family. It is the status he crossed an ocean to escape. He did not leave the most powerful institution in British public life, did not give up his titles and his security and his position and his family relationships to find himself tolerated by a different set of powerful people on a different continent. The visa file may never be released. The Heritage Foundation's legal challenge may exhaust itself through the courts without ever producing a conclusive, definitive outcome. Harry may renew his visa without significant incident, and this particular chapter may close quietly, without drama, without the confrontation that the political commentators have been anticipating. That is a real possibility. The machinery of power sometimes simply moves on to the next target. But here is what cannot be undone. The vulnerability has been exposed. The leverage has been identified. The mechanism by which Harry's American life can be threatened or disrupted or held hostage has been demonstrated publicly in legal filings and congressional statements and media coverage that reached every corner of the world. Everyone who needs to know it knows it. And in the world of institutional power, the world Harry believed he had escaped, the world of quiet pressure and managed exposure and the strategic deployment of information, exposed vulnerabilities do not stay dormant indefinitely. They are filed away. They are noted. They wait for the moment when they become useful again. And so I want to ask you, the person watching this right now, wherever you are, whatever you think of Harry and Meghan, whatever side of this debate you have come down on, a question that I think is genuinely worth sitting with. If Harry's immigration file were released tomorrow, and it showed definitively that he received preferential treatment that no ordinary applicant would ever have received, that the rules were bent or the process was managed in ways that the Department of Homeland Security would never acknowledge publicly, would that change how you see him? Would it change the story you have been told? Or has the establishment on both sides of the Atlantic already used this story as a weapon, as a lever, as a way of keeping a man in line and reminding him of who actually holds the power, regardless of what that file actually contains? Regardless of whether the treatment was preferential or entirely routine, because that is the question at the center of all of this. Not just whether Harry broke immigration rules, not just whether the DHS looked the other way, but whether this entire saga, the FOIA requests, the court battles, the congressional statements, the White House signals, is about the law at all, or whether it is about something much older and much simpler. The thing that has always been true about powerful institutions and the people who try to leave them, they do not let you go. Not really. Not completely. They find the thread and they pull it, and they wait to see how much you unravel. The comments are open below, and I want to hear from you, genuinely, honestly, because on this one, I think the conversation matters more than the conclusions. Drop your thoughts. Tell me what you believe is actually in that file. Tell me whether you think this story ends cleanly or whether it ends the way these stories always end, with quiet capitulation dressed up as a personal decision. If you are not already subscribed, do it now. Hit the bell, because topic 8 is coming. And it takes us back inside the palace walls to a woman who has spent years constructing a public image of warmth and competence and effortless duty, and who is now watching, very quietly, very carefully, the ground beneath that image begin to shift, one closed door at a time. You do not want to miss it.